when we talk about this from an industry perspective, that like frustrates me a little bit is because we talk about sleep and we talk about sleep hygiene, which is very important, right? Cold, dark, quiet, without a doubt. We need to manage our stress throughout the day. Very, very important for sleep. But it's their circadian behaviors that really impact whether or not we're going to be able to fall asleep and stay asleep. And I think that's the second piece to kind of fixing sleep is definitely stabilizing or reducing that night-to-night sleep-wake variability.
And that would mean going to sleep at the same time and limiting light. Anything else?
Going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time is probably the best thing that you can do for mental and physical health resilience.
This episode is sponsored by House of Macadamias. Let's talk about nuts. And no, I'm not talking about those kind of nuts, and I am not a urologist, so that's just really bad mom jokes. Macadamias, House of Macadamias. I love these nuts, and here's why. They have 30% less carbohydrates than almonds, which I'm not a huge fan of almonds. They are delicious. They're rich in omega-7s. They have dry roasted chocolate, white chocolate, raspberry white chocolate. They have 2 grams of net carbs. It doesn't really matter what kind of diet you are following. You can put them in your nutrition plan as long as it is calorie controlled. This company is amazing. They've partnered with farmers in Africa. These are the best farms in Africa who have sourced these macadamias. They have a whole slew of different products, whether it's macadamia nut oil, again, whether it's dry roasted or it's dipped. They even have bars. Easy to travel with, which I love. Go to houseofmacadamias.com/Dr. Lyon and you can use the code Dr. Lyon for a 20% discount on your first order. I think that you will absolutely love it. These are one of a kind. In fact, I've never seen a low carb version of dipped macadamia nuts. Head on over to houseofmacadamias.com/Dr. Lyon and use the code Dr. Lyon for 20% off. Kristen Holmes, welcome to the podcast. I'm so excited to have you on. I just want to share a little bit about how we met, actually. So we met on the 777 expedition. They were doing a training jump, and this was like in the middle of Arizona. By the way, literally in the middle of Arizona, in nowhere, Arizona. And the 777 is the elite military operators, the SEALs, were doing 7 jumps in 7 days on 7 continents.
Mm-hmm. To raise money for Folds of Honor.
Exactly, to raise money for Folds of Honor. And that's where we met.
I know. It was so great. I mean, I was just fangirling you, for ages. So the opportunity came about to be able to hang out with you in person. It was pretty incredible.
Well, I appreciate that. But the real fangirl moment is about to happen right now because I've begged you to come on this podcast. You are a amazing resource for all things adaptation. And I would love for you to share a little bit about who you are, what you're doing. And then I want to jump in, before we go forward, I want to talk a little bit about your history because you are a very interesting mix of, you've been a competitive athlete and then a coach and now a scientist. So.
Yeah. So as you said, I guess early career, I was a 2-sport athlete at the University of Iowa. I competed in field hockey, was my main sport, and also competed in basketball. And then went on to compete for the U.S. national team. Was actually competing in college at the same time for the U.S. field hockey team, and spent about 7 years competing for the U.S., which is incredible. And then simultaneously was getting experience coaching. So I coached the U19 national team. Actually, I wasn't too much older than them at the time, but got some experience in the coaching world and just loved it. I loved working with athletes. I loved obviously the technical and tactical aspects of the sport. I just was adored and loved trying to kind of solve these really kind of acute problems, in kind of that environment. So it was coaching at the international level, and then got an opportunity to be the head coach at Princeton University. So I went on to coach at Princeton for 13 seasons, and it was incredible.
Hockey, right?
Field hockey, yeah. Yeah, and I was kind of in parallel teaching a seminar there. aptly titled Performance Optimization, which was great. And it was just a mix of, I had some student athletes, but some students as well. So yeah, Princeton was really an incredible experience. And I was actually, while I was at Princeton, I was building a technology. I was using just Fitbit API and pulling in their heart rate data and transforming it and really trying to understand this notion of readiness. So you mentioned adaptation. I've always been really, really interested in, how do we, at the time, obviously it was coaching. So how do I set, what are the conditions that actually enable my athletes to show up with the necessary capacity to take on the load that I want to put on them that day? And with this technology that I built, I realized very quickly that the load I was putting on them in practice, those 2 hours of training, actually didn't predict next day readiness. So I wasn't necessarily able to use those data to inform how I train them tomorrow. So for those folks in kind of the coaching world know that is what we're always trying to understand. What kind of load, volume, intensity can I put on my athlete to train them in a way that is going to maximize their adaptation? So I realized kind of in the data and over the course of years and years of training athletes that it's the other 22 hours that they're not with me that is most predictive of whether or not you're going to adapt in a functional way to previous day training load for sure, but life load. So it's these other factors, in training, it depends what phase of training you're in, of course, but, training plays a part, but it's just a piece of the puzzle. So it's what are these other factors that really are going to influence whether or not we can show up tomorrow for, with the right amount of capacity to operate in a way that feels really good.
You must have had some really interesting aha moments that changed the way that you live your life and also what you are doing now. So right now you are, why don't you tell the listeners?
Yeah. So I'm vice president of performance science at a technology company called Whoop, WHOOP. We make a physiological monitoring device that is basically taking in, at a very high sample rate, huge amounts of heart rate data, and then transforming that data to give you insight into how your body is responding and adapting to external stress. So we measure things like heart rate variability and resting heart rate, sleep. We model that to give you a sense of how you're adapting to load. We have a very deep dive into your sleep. So looking at your sleep architecture, the time in bed, your sleep consistency, how much sleep debt you're bringing on. And then we measure your strain, which is a kind of a summary statistic of your cardiovascular load that builds throughout the day in real time because you can kind of see it. And there's lots of coaching and advice on the platform on how to improve the metrics that we say are important to track. So I basically involved in the research side of things. So I do a little bit on the validation side. So working with external partners to really understand. To really give Whoop a point of view on what are the behaviors that move around the metrics that we track. So if we say heart rate variability, for example, is an important marker to pay attention to, what are the behaviors that are going to increase heart rate variability or decrease heart rate variability? And increasing heart rate variability is a sign that you're adapting functionally to stress.
And what is heart rate variability?
So heart rate variability is the time interval between heartbeats. And the more variability, the healthier you are, the more responsive you are to your environment. The more able you are to adapt to your environment in a functional way.
And so you're able to measure these outcomes based on the input that an individual is doing in not just training, but in the other 22 hours of their life.
Exactly. Yeah. And, we have obviously a very rich data set that we can pull a lot of these data from. So we can go in and retrospectively look at our data set and ask some of these questions. But where my kind of job is a little bit different, we do retrospective analysis, but we do a lot of prospective studies. So we're trying to isolate effects. So for example, what does time-restricted eating have on next day recovery, and how does it impact sleep? How does it impact your training capacity, your mental health? These are questions that we try to ask of our data, but try to do in this perspective kind of research are able to get surveys and have kind of qualitative data that helps us contextualize, those data.
And what are some of the buckets that you look at?
Yeah, so circadian is one of the big buckets and a massive focus of my research. So we're really looking at, and when people think about circadian, it's basically, the environment is giving our body clock. So we want to be able to anticipate what's happening in the environment. And that's really what our circadian rhythms help us do. And in terms of what's happening in the environment that our body is anticipating and trying to respond to are things like eating and exercise and activity. Light is a huge influencer on our circadian rhythms. So when we're viewing light and when we're not viewing a light is going to impact our alertness and our sleepiness. And we want to make sure that all of those external inputs are aligned with our endogenous preferences. So we have these preferences that our body wants to do. And when there's a misalignment between what we actually do and what our endogenous preferences are, that's a term called misalignment.
Can you say that again? I think that's a super critical point and probably at the focal point of circadian biology.
So I think people underestimate how important it is to ensure that there's alignment between our endogenous preferences and what is happening in our daily life. So we have basically an active phase of our circadian rhythm and an inactive phase of our circadian rhythm. So things that should be happening during the active phase of our circadian rhythm is we should be viewing a lot of light. We should be exercising. We should be eating. And then there's this inactive phase of our circadian rhythm, which is, basically once the sun goes down, we want to not eat. We want to be, kind of start to ramp down our social activity, ramp down our activity levels generally. We want to restrict our light viewing. So when we are doing things during our interactive phase that should be happening during our active phase, our body, all sorts of deleterious things happen and have severe repercussions mentally and physically. If these are if you're chronically misaligned, this is going to wreak havoc on your system.
And when you talk about circadian alignment, a circadian clock is a 24-hour clock.
Correct.
And the active phase of the circadian timing for a non-nocturnal mammal such as humans would be
or diurnal,
would be eating, I don't know, exercising, all the things that you said, also probably mental activity.
Yeah. We're going to be way more primed to focus during the active phase of our circadian rhythm. So that's basically once the sun goes up, once the sun goes down, that's when cognitively we're going to be primed. And that's when we're going to be metabolically, most efficient to, and biasing toward earlier part of the circadian rhythm, like earlier part of the day, we want to try to take on a bulk of our calories.
Yeah, I think that this also just sets up a big picture concept is that when the sun goes down, we should be shutting down, essentially. If we were to truly live in alignment with these
endogenous preferences.
These endogenous preferences.
Yeah.
Nobody does that. And I'm not even just talking about food. I'm talking about doing work at night, even if it is not on a computer, it's still reading, it's still very active.
Yeah.
And we live in an environment that throws us out of any kind of circadian alignment, right?
We really do. And, we haven't adapted to blue light, as a species. So I think that's really important to recognize. We're looking at blue light from our devices, certainly after the sun goes down. Obviously filters help and blue light blackened glasses help.
Do we know what adaptation would look like for a human to blue light?
I don't know. And I don't know if that's been investigated, what would be required.
Yeah.
But I can tell you that it's not going to happen during our lifetime.
Darn it.
I know, which is a bummer. But I mean, if you think about, 20% of the labor force are shift workers. That's 600 million people are working outside the hours of basically 7 a.m. and 6 p.m., right? If we think about that's our time point of like when we want to be active. And we know shift workers, obviously, they I hate to say it because
I know.
I hate,
But it's true.
but cancer proneness and
Obesity, all kinds
and glucose
diseases.
Metabolic dysregulation. So it's sad. But that said, the focus of my work is actually in these high stakes, high stress environments. So I study military operators. I study frontline healthcare physicians, clinicians, providers, and professional athletes, all who really struggle with this circadian misalignment. But like you said, this isn't just a problem for shift workers and operators and athletes.
Totally, it's everybody.
This is everyone, right? And I think it's just raising awareness, like letting people know that, hey, these have profound consequences on your ability to show up and live your values in a way that, feels good to you. And I think once people experience alignment, circadian alignment, I think they start to, they recognize, I think, the opportunity mentally, physically, and emotionally. And I think once you experience that alignment, it is actually hard to go back.
This episode is sponsored by House of Macadamias. Let's talk about nuts. And no, I'm not talking about those kind of nuts, and I am not a urologist, so that's just really bad mom jokes. Macadamias, House of Macadamias. I love these nuts, and here's why. They have 30% less carbohydrates than almonds, which I'm not a huge fan of almonds. They are delicious. They're rich in omega-7s. They have dry roasted chocolate, white chocolate, raspberry white chocolate. They have 2 grams of net carbs. It doesn't really matter what kind of diet you are following. You can put them in your nutrition plan as long as it is calorie controlled. This company is amazing. They've partnered with farmers in Africa. These are the best farms in Africa who have sourced these macadamias. They have a whole slew of different products, whether it's macadamia nut oil, again, whether it's dry roasted or it's dipped. They even have bars. Easy to travel with, which I love. Go to houseofmacadamias.com/Dr. Lyon and you can use the code Dr. Lyon for a 20% discount on your first order. I think that you will absolutely love it. These are one of a kind. In fact, I've never seen a low carb version of dipped macadamia nuts. Head on over to houseofmacadamias.com/Dr. Lyon and use the code Dr. Lyon for 20% off.
And it's not about being necessarily perfect every single day, but I think thinking about your life in terms of, okay, when can I actually align myself with the natural cues in the environment? And what would that actually look like for myself and my family? I think it's an important exercise. Again, if we want to try to reduce our illness and injury burden,
which we all do.
Right. I mean, I think we all, none of us want to get sick. We want to be available for life, and I think availability, there are some very specific behaviors that we can deploy that help us be more available. I always think about this from an athlete perspective, availability is everything when you're coaching a team, the more athletes you have who are available to train and compete, literally the more successful you're going to be. And, not that completely trumps talent, but availability is everything, right? And I think about that in the context of just, normal people walking around. We want to be able, what it's like when you're sick, the world just, falls apart kind of, So, how do we pay that down? Well, we adopt behaviors that promote this alignment.
And what are those top behaviors?
Yeah. So definitely viewing light the moment you wake up is really important.
Does it have to be outside light?
Yeah. Natural light, generally, basically when you kind of step outside, prior to 10 a.m., you're bathing yourself in you want 5 minutes, you'll basically expose yourself to about 100 lux of light.
Clothes or no clothes?
The more the natural light's on your skin, the better. No question. Vitamin D, there's lots of benefits, but this is really about the light entering the retina. So once that light hits the retina, it then signals to the suprachiasmatic nucleus, and then it, has a downstream signaling to every peripheral clock and the central clock. Basically every cell, organ, and tissue in your body is receiving this information.
Which is incredible because
which is insane, right?
Cell has a clock.
Exactly. And those clocks need to know what to do, right? And they're anticipating that moment in the morning where you're going to view light. So literally within 20 minutes of waking up, you want to get outside. You want to view the natural sunlight for 5 to 10 minutes. If it's super bright out, 5 minutes is plenty. You're going to get that 100 1,000 lux of light.
And this is our hardwired biology.
This is hardwired. Yeah. And there's kind of no getting around this, really.
And most people don't get up, get outside.
No.
It's not adequate to do it through a window, correct?
It is not. No. It's a lot less efficient. I'm going to take you hours and hours. And the idea.
What are you doing? I'm just sitting by the window. You've been there for 5 hours. No.
Yeah. But yeah, just simply getting outside has lots of benefits. But mainly it is really about getting that pulse of light, which, then you release cortisol, like all of these things, from a neurological standpoint are begin firing. And it basically tells your system that it is time to be alert, right? And that is really, kicks off the ability to have, high levels of cognitive functioning, and just energy levels. It also tells your body that it's probably time to eat. So there's all sorts of things that are happening when you view that first pulse of light in the morning. And then the kind of behavior that I think goes along with that is that you want to restrict light after the sun goes down. So it's important that because what happens when we view light after the sun goes down, your body then thinks it's time to be awake, right? So it confuses the system.
And this would be overhead light, screens, or any kind of light.
Yeah, any kind of light, really. And you just I think the strategy, I suppose, is just to dim the lights in your home environment the best that you can. Limit the amount of interaction you have with devices. Just put the filters on, put the blue light blocking glasses, try to block all that light. Because what happens is if you have that exposure, your melatonin production, like the kind of sleepy hormone, is going to be delayed. It might not be as strong as it typically would be. And there's some interesting mechanisms related to that I can talk about in terms of how it impacts our metabolism. But and melatonin has a neuroprotective effect. I mean, it's so important. So if we're not releasing melatonin or it's weak, that has a lot more consequences apart from just whether or not it makes us sleepy or not. So so that blue light or that light after the sun goes down is really going to inhibit that melatonin production. And we might fall asleep just because we're exhausted, but that is actually going to influence the depth and quality of our sleep over the course of the night.
Basically, what you're saying is a good night's sleep starts actually in the morning.
You have to fix circadian rhythms in order to fix your sleep. And I think that's, again, when we talk about this from an industry perspective, that frustrates me a little bit, is because we talk about sleep and we talk about sleep hygiene, which is very important, right? Cold, dark, quiet, without a doubt. We need to manage our stress throughout the day. Very, very important for sleep. But it's their circadian behaviors that really impact whether or not we're going to be able to fall asleep and stay asleep. And I think that's the second piece to kind of fixing sleep is definitely stabilizing or reducing that night-to-night sleep-wake variability.
And that would mean going to sleep at the same time and limiting light. Anything else?
Going to bed at the same time, waking up at the same time is probably the best thing that you can do for mental and physical health resilience. And this is bubbled up in all of the research that we have done. We are able to objectively measure when you go to bed and when you wake up. So we have a very clean measure of your sleep regularity or your sleep consistency. The more variable that sleep-wake time is, the more physical and mental issues we see.
Like things like anxiety, depression.
Yeah, so just general psychological functioning. So anxiety, how you perceive stress. With the military operators, the more variability, the more homesickness they feel, the less control they feel in their daily lives.
Do you think it's a fatigue issue, or is there something else with the circadian biology that affects us above and beyond some of those perhaps known factors?
Yeah, I think, duration kind of matters, which impacts, sleep loss will impact obviously fatigue, but we see independent effects. That's what's interesting here.
Yeah, that is interesting.
Is that sleep-wake time seems to operate kind of independently and has its own, when we're not stabilizing our sleep-wake time, that seems to have its own effects. I mean, when we think about it, has a direct effect on our insulin sensitivity.
Mm-hmm.
And it has a direct effect on melatonin production, obviously. So, and I mentioned melatonin production as being so important, but that is, again, that's going to influence your metabolism. It's going to influence, your cognitive functioning. Melatonin really is a critical hormone. And I think, if I think about the problems that we have as a society from a health perspective, a lot of it probably goes back to the weakness of our melatonin production.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
So someone is going to wake up at the same time, go to bed at the same time, light viewing in the morning.
Yep.
Dimming the lights at night,
Yep.
overhead as much as possible.
Yep.
What kind of range is there? Is it safe to say you can wake up with a 30-minute range, a 15-minute range? What is the
That's a great question. And this is an area that we're investigating more in our data to really see, can we actually tell you that, hey, an hour left or right, and the sleep and wake will produce X effect. So we don't have those data yet. Dr. Gina Poe, who is a sleep scientist out of, I think she's Cal Berkeley, and I apologize if that's incorrect, but she's an incredible sleep scientist, a leader in her field. She says 30 minutes of variability on either end is suboptimal.
Oh,
so these ranges are small.
That's a really tight window.
I know. And I think that's why, we really see these strong effects once we get outside that 30-minute block. Again, these are prelim data. But once we get outside that 30-minute block, we see that in our data too.
And you see strong effects on mood, perceived stress. What about
anxiety and sleep architecture?
Okay.
So, when you look at a REM onset and then and looking at, how much time we're spending in these deeper stages of sleep. Sleep-wake variability is massive. I'd almost go to say that if you have to prioritize, the length of sleep versus this consistent sleep-wake time, go for this consistent sleep-wake time. This is a behavior that I've been working on. It's a hard behavior. I'm not going to it is sugarcoat it. It's hard to stabilize your sleep-wake time given all the distractions and all the things that you could be doing. But once I stabilized my sleep-wake time starting in 2017, I literally haven't been sick. I haven't had a cold. I haven't. Now, obviously, I do a lot of other things right. But that was the one massive behavior change. So I keep my variability, below 30 minutes for the most part, on average.
No matter what?
I do my best.
For the most part.
I do my best. Yeah. When I look at it over the course of a month, I'm pretty much, at that 30-minute to 45-minute window of variability. But I think that has been the single most important change that I've made and has, I think, my markers, my blood biomarkers, my, my inner age, things like that, that I can objectively measure, my heart rate variability, my resting heart rate, my fasting glucose. All of those things have improved significantly. Clinically significantly.
What about the things during the day? For example, I'm sure that there's an ebb and flow that's supposed to happen with light. If we were to imagine that we were outside, there's sometimes that light is higher and sometimes that it's different. Are there things within the day that we should be doing?
Yeah. Getting as much light, natural light as possible, I would say is kind of would be the prescription. If you really want to try to set your circadian rhythm and get quality sleep at night, expose yourself to as much natural light as you can during the day. It's hard. We work in offices where, it's really hard, but just whenever you get the chance to get outside, get the light on your natural light on the retina, on the face, on the skin, you want to try to do that.
What about the large sun lamps? If someone is like, I cannot get outside. Or maybe they can go for a 10-minute walk, or maybe they have an hour lunch break. Probably not. Would a light box suffice during the day?
It is. There's no question it's better than nothing. And that is definitely what we recommend for our shift workers. To try to, kind of make up for that lost natural light. Nothing can replace, of course, the natural sunlight. But the red light boxes are awesome.
Okay.
Yeah.
What about food? You mentioned food.
Yeah.
There's this huge push. And actually, I usually, before I met you, I would fast till noon.
Mm-hmm.
And when you and I were sitting down and talking about this circadian biology and the circadian biology of what the body clocks are meant to do, because I think food actually trumps light when it comes to its impact on changing these clocks or impacting
I mean,
them?
light is definitely the strongest mediator.
Oh, good.
For sure.
Good
So yeah, so lightness during the active phase, darkness during the active phase is kind of, if we're to put a taxonomy, that's number one. I would say, your eating window is probably 2. So there's lots of really good research. I mean, I see this in my own data as well, and in the WHOOP data. Folks who eat a meal within 2 hours of bedtime have definitely have a negative impact on all the markers of recovery as well as sleep. So in what's happening mechanistically there is digestion is a parasympathetic activity, right? So we think of rest and digest. Sleep is also a parasympathetic activity. So when you're trying to do these both at the same time, they compete for resources, and digestion is always going to win out. So we're always going to bias toward our system will bias toward digestion. It's going to take care of that first, and then it can do all the things that we want it to do from a recovery and regeneration standpoint. So you want to, once you go to bed, if you intend to sleep at 10 p.m., you want to basically probably stop eating at 7. Give yourself at least a 2 to 3 hour buffer between when you your last meal or your last calorie and when you intend to sleep, and that will put you in a position to really maximize all the things that need to happen during sleep that enable you to kind of wake up as rejuvenated and refreshed as possible.
That's great advice. I failed to ask this question. Does it matter when someone wakes up and when someone goes to sleep? Is there a natural biology for all humans, or is everybody different?
Yeah, everyone's a little bit different, but to be clear, midnight is the middle of the night, right? So I think the night owls.
Yeah, and for us moms, midnight is 3 a.m.
I know.
That's I know,
totally.
I'll see you. Good night.
I know.
9 p.m.
Exactly.
9 p.m. is my midnight.
I know. Having kids is the best because their circadian clocks are so darn strong that you cannot.
Not my kid.
Yeah.
Go to sleep.
I know. But yes, no question. There are certain things that need to happen that if we are awake, they simply cannot happen. So, what the science says around that is basically if we are viewing light between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., the dopamine system next day doesn't work as effectively. So the reward system, right? So those neurotransmitters are basically dampened when we're viewing light between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m.
Would that lead someone, so if the dopamine system, which is that drive motivation system, would that make someone be less driven or be more likely and more vulnerable to, risk-taking behaviors?
All the above.
Okay.
Yeah, we just, when those systems aren't working properly, it's hard to make clear decisions about our life. and I think, and so just kind of go back to your original question about, when should we be falling asleep? Well, if we know that there's these deleterious repercussions happening when we're viewing light between 11 p.m. and 4 a.m., then we know that, okay, well, 11 p.m. is too late to go to bed. So, and if 12 is considered kind of the middle of the night, then if I'm a night owl, my biological preference for sleep is probably around 10:30-ish, 11, I would say the latest, right? I mean, at minimum, if you're going to sleep at 11:30, you absolutely do not want to be viewing light from 11 to 11:30. Or if you're falling asleep at 12 a.m., you don't want to view light between 11 p.m. and 12 a.m. So we know that there are serious next day ramifications. And obviously, if you do it once or twice a month, no big deal, right? Of course. But this will add up. And we wonder where are all these mental health issues coming from? It's viewing light out of phase of the natural light dark cycle. That is what's happening here, I think, when we're looking at the mental health issues at scale. I think it comes back probably to viewing light in these inappropriate times.
Thank you to First Form for sponsoring this episode of the show. I've been working with First Form since 2018. I love the company. I love the people. Of course, you've heard that a million times. They make great products. And one of the products I want to talk to you about is a Microfactor. And it's a complete daily nutrient pack. People come to me and are really confused about what to take. There's a lot of information in this space. Should they take a multivitamin? Should they take an antioxidant? And at the end of the day, you might be taking a bazillion supplements and everything is disorganized. These are single serving multi-packs, which make it super easy. They have a multivitamin, CoQ10, an antioxidant supplement, even a fruit and veggie tablet, and essential fatty acids. These are great individual packs. That way, there's absolutely no excuse. You can check it out at firstform.com/Dr. Lyon. That's firstform, 1stphorm.com/Dr. Lyon. And it really takes out all the confusion. If you're one of those people that use it as a barrier to entry, meaning I don't want to stock all my pill bottles and then put it into a pill organizer, this takes all the work out of it for you. It also eliminates confusion. Head on over to firstform.com/Dr. Lyon and check out their Microfactor Complete Daily Nutrient Packs.
That's really critical and important to understand.
Yeah.
Do you wear sunglasses?
I don't, no. So I definitely try to take on as
much light
as possible. I need glasses to see, unfortunately, but I try to expose myself to as many of the, natural kind of wavelengths as possible during the day and even at night. So the moon and, that also is a cue for your system. So watching the sunset is also really powerful and can kind of strengthen that that circadian system.
This is an off-the-wall question. The full moon, would that keep you awake or help put you to sleep?
No.
It's a different kind of light?
Same thing with fire too. Doesn't affect the melatonin.
Wow, that's fascinating. This brings us back to, we live in this environment where we're driving cars, eating fast foods, viewing light, just a whole toxic environment, which I can appreciate because we are a westernized society. This is just what happens with the evolution of humans. But the health is worse than ever before, but the opportunity to have good health is better than ever before.
That's so well said.
And I think that if we can be really disciplined to put some of these practices in place, we have more resources and more wisdom because we stand on the shoulders of these giants of individuals who've been doing research for decades to now begin to collect the data much like you're doing and then implement and deploy, as you said, and execute. So in terms of food, is there a time that, again, before I met you, I was always telling people to fast till middle of the day, which I don't actually tell them anymore. So thank you. And my patients, thank you. And the listeners, thank you. From waking up, is there a time that one should eat?
Yeah. So, there's definitely sex differences here too that I think are important to acknowledge. So men seem to do very well with, prolonged fasting. I think women in certain phases of their menstrual cycle will do fine with some longer fasting. So for example, for women who are naturally cycling, I would say during menses and, during ovulation, those are the times where if I am going to try to extend my window and
your fasting
window, I will go to noon just to take advantage of the autophagy and all the good things that are kind of happening with fast. Because I don't want to say that intermittent fasting is bad necessarily, but I think there are times where women are going to be able to do that, right? Because the luteal phase, so once you get out of the follicular phase, menses and ovulation, you're in the luteal phase, you're preparing for menses or or a baby, depending on what happened. And surprise. And there's a lot of effort going on in the body. So fasting puts an extra stress on the body that is just that can have negative consequences. And it's not all the protective and good things that could come from a fast. You're not able to realize during that phase of your cycle.
So women should fast during which phase?
If you're going to fast during the luteal phase. Okay. So after menses and ovulation, do not fast during the luteal phase. I'm sorry. You want to fast during either menses or the ovulation.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah,
and is the body kind of primed to do it anyway?
So I wouldn't. So there's not a lot of research on females with regard to fasting. So I just want to caveat that. But what I've seen in my own data is that definitely, during that follicular phase, that's when I seem to be able to fast and it doesn't, disrupt my sleep or, my markers look good. Like I think that that would be the time if you're going to do it. Yeah. And then during the luteal phase, you just want to ensure that, you probably want to eat within, an hour or so of waking up. And I think back to the circadian component though, for both men and women, if we wait to eat all of our calories toward the back end of the day, we are definitely metabolically not as primed to use those nutrients and digest those nutrients. So we want to try to get a bulk of our protein, kind of earlier in the day. So
I totally agree with that.
Okay, good. Yeah. Yeah, it's good to hear you say that. So, between 7 a.m. and 4 p.m., we want to try to get as much protein as possible. And that's when we want to get the bulk of our calories. And we've seen in studies when people miss breakfast, they tend to actually eat more calories. So I think there is something to be said about, eating 3 squares a day, or if you're going to have 2 meals, biasing toward breakfast and lunch.
What's I think fascinating is when you look at some of the nutritional research, and Heather Leidy did breakfast skipping meals. So she looked at a group of female adolescents and they skipped breakfast. Those that skipped breakfast, exactly what you said, would be at a metabolic disadvantage. They also craved higher calorie foods later on. But what's interesting is thinking about all the nutritional research, the majority of them don't take into consideration sleep-wake cycles.
I know.
And potentially that could be the next layer of what is the impact, right? We typically look at, we always, I say always, but typically the first meal of the day when you're coming out of an overnight fast is what we test. It's certainly what's tested in muscle protein synthesis, and a multitude of other metabolic nutritional interventions. But very rarely, I think maybe I've seen one study that takes into account that circadian biology.
Yeah. I mean, the dysregulated sleep-wake time has huge implications on next day ghrelin and leptin levels. So, I mean, there is a very, very strong link between night to night sleep-wake variability and glucose metabolism.
So the first meal of the day, doesn't matter the composition from a circadian standpoint. I know that it does. The composition certainly matters from a metabolism standpoint. Do you think that it matters from a circadian standpoint? Or do we not have that data yet?
That's really interesting. Those data might exist, but I'm not quite sure what it would say. I'm just trying to think like logically. I still think that, fueling for, whatever your activity you're engaging in is kind of the right way to think about your fueling during the day. I don't know if you agree with that, but
I do.
If I'm going to work out, like I'm going to take on some more carbohydrates, to kind of prep for that, for that effort. If I'm trying to think, I'm going to have more fat, more protein. I have protein at every meal, of course. Dr. Lyon?
She better be.
I know. Yep. Don't worry about that. But I'll have
first and last.
I'll have protein and fat if I'm really trying to kind of think, and then if I'm working out, it'll be protein and carbohydrates. So I don't know. I mean, I think from we want to just try to get those array of nutrients as early in the day as possible, I guess would be the thinking.
That makes sense. Yeah. In terms of meal timing, do you have thoughts on consistency of meal timing?
Yeah. I mean, again, our body just loves regularity, from a circadian standpoint. We're anticipating cues in the environment, right? Our body's anticipating light. They're anticipating darkness. We're anticipating exercise and activity. We're anticipating food. So yeah, we absolutely want to try to, again, line up those endogenous preferences with our actual behavior. So that means that, our body's going to expect food around 7 and around noon and around 4.
You can train it.
Or 5. You can train it for sure. Yeah.
And you recommend stopping eating 2 hours before going to bed? Or do you actually recommend stopping it even earlier, for example, when the sun goes down?
As early as you can get away with, honestly. Yeah. I mean, once the sun goes down, if you can, you don't want to wake up hungry. You don't want to wake up in the middle of the night because you're starving. And I know a lot of the guys that we work with, professional athletes and operators, and their metabolism is going so fast.
Those guys are eating Hormel chili under the table.
Yeah.
Guys.
Oh my goodness gracious. Yeah.
We know what you're eating.
Yeah, we know. Yeah. I have some really funny stories about Yeah. But
And by the way, when we were at 777, the food choices were really suboptimal.
They
just want to
stunk.
Throw that out there, Mike Sorelli.
That's right. Gabrielle and I were like, I don't know, splitting a kind bar.
So bad.
It's bad.
But anyway.
We digress.
Yeah.
So I think ideally we stop eating. I would say 3 hours. For me, just once the sun goes down, I stop eating. Obviously in the winter, the sun, it's like 4:30 and that's not as practical. But I give myself, an hour buffer of when the sun goes down and when I finish kind of my last calorie. But I would say, if you do have to eat, and we actually were looking at this research together, I feel like a few weeks ago, casein protein, you just stuff that's easily digestible, seems to not impact sleep architecture and sleep onset. And so I think, and I think there's more research that needs to be done in that area. These sample sizes are quite small, but it seems like casein is okay to eat before sleep. And, I would say if you have some walnuts, again, that will help with the, feeling satiated. And walnuts is actually a precursor to melatonin. So
which is unusual.
As is raspberries. Yeah. So they're both precursors to melatonin. So, so those could actually, benefit you. Kiwis we see too also.
Heart cherry,
serotonin. Yeah. Those are all precursors to melatonin. So anything higher in serotonin, I would say is okay to eat. But other than that, I think we probably want to try to avoid
Do
food.
Fluids impact the circadian biology
If
as
they
well?
have calories.
But if it's just water?
No, it's totally fine. Yeah.
Okay. So then there's no cue that would impact. So, okay, that's good to know. Exercise.
Yeah. So the research is really mixed. There's actually this pretty large study, but I think when I really looked at the study, I wouldn't say that it accounted for a lot of the confounders that I think tell you whether or not it's a good or bad study. So I'm going to dismiss that study, but I would say just in principle, the more active we are in the lead up to bed, generally that's going to make my ability to kind of wind down and prepare for sleep. It's going to extend that time. So I just think in principle, and I think it's highly variable. I think if we're going to the gym at 9 p.m. and we're working out and we're exposing ourselves to a bunch of overhead light, it's just going to make it really hard to fall asleep, right?
And you probably go back and forth, which is more important, sleep or exercise, getting that training in. But
yeah,
it's probably sleep because the next day can be shot.
I mean, exercise. I definitely go back and forth because exercise is just so important. But you want your hormones and you want everything in your body like working as it should, so you have to weigh the cost benefit. There's no question. And I think I'm kind of biased toward believing that we need to get the sleep. We need to be sleeping. Right. So,
right.
So I think that, maybe some days you're going to prioritize exercise over sleep potentially. But yeah, do whatever you can to kind of do it during the active phase of your circadian rhythm.
And that would also probably be the same for medications. You probably want to dose medications similar to a body rhythm, whether it's testosterone, or estrogen, progesterone. I'm assuming that I don't know how impactful that is, but I would guess that there's probably a role for circadian medicine in administration.
Yeah. It's called chronomedicine, and it's
cool.
An emerging field.
Wow.
Yeah, it's really exciting. And this is not my area of expertise necessarily in the sense that, I think every medication is going to be slightly different, but there is no question, even if you're taking an NSAID, you want to take that earlier in the day. I've seen in our data with athletes that an NSAID can impact sleep. It can impact sleep negatively by up to 15%.
Really?
Yeah. So, which is interesting. So when it's taken within a couple hours of bed. So
have you guys seen anything about PPIs?
No, but that would be very interesting to look into. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Now you talk about other things. You talk about hormetic stress and heat and cold. Tell us some of the other things that really make people more adaptable.
Yeah. So there's things, I kind of put this in the recovery bucket. So, certainly what we put into our body, our fueling. is really critical. And this is an area that you talk about a ton, but I think there's some really, nutrient dense food, prioritizing protein, all these things are really important. That's going to impact our ability, obviously, to adapt functionally to external stress. Hydration, very important. And I would say kind of in, the hydration bucket or just putting liquids in our body, we want to avoid alcohol at all costs. That is going to disrupt sleep. That is going to impair next day recovery, executive function. I mean, it's going to impair every part of your body. So from a recovery standpoint, if you're looking to optimize recovery,
don't drink.
Don't drink. Yeah. I mean, it's a toxin that you're putting in your body, and it just is, we're just, you divert all of your resources, get diverted away from recovery when your body is having to metabolize a poison. So I would think really carefully. Again, if you're interested in optimizing recovery, that would be something I would avoid. I think too, we see this very clearly in our data. I mean, that is the one behavior that is most predictive of if people consume alcohol within a couple hours of bedtime, it crushes your sleep. So, your ability to get in deeper stages of sleep is totally compromised. And then you wake up with a substantially lower HRV, which we talked about in the beginning of the podcast, is a marker to help you understand how effectively you are adapting.
Is there a number that people should shoot for
So it's totally variable. Yeah. So, your HRV is going to be different than mine. It's based on genetics, heart size, a whole bunch of factors influence your HRV. That said, I think people who have lived a relatively clean lifestyle seem to have a higher, baseline HRV, which makes sense.
It would make sense.
But it's all relative to yourself. So, you kind of look at, okay, where am I today? And then you want your HRV to kind of increase over time, and that's one of the markers. When I made that big kind of lifestyle change and started, I'm like, all right, I'm going to stabilize my sleep wake time. That's one thing that I've seen. I mean, my HRV has increased 40 milliseconds, which is just,
outstanding,
insane. I was in the 60s and I'm in the hundreds now. So it's just crazy. But yeah, I mean, I think we need to think very intentionally about the liquids that we're putting in our body, and prioritize water. The other thing that we see in our data relative to recovery is dehydration. Obviously, also has a huge impact on markers of recovery as well as sleep.
What about caffeine and nicotine?
Yeah. So nicotine, I'm not sure. Actually, I haven't seen any data around nicotine. I think that's probably because the folks on our platform, very few people probably smoke or report smoking. So
what about dip and chew nicotine gum?
Oh my God.
We know lots of individuals. Exactly. I'm just curious
yeah, we need to do a study on dip actually. I'm so curious about that.
I know a handful of participants.
I know. Dipping's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the nicotine, we don't know. What about caffeine?
Yeah. So caffeine within, basically
Same
after
thing,
12,
nothing shocking.
Nothing surprising with caffeine. It's definitely going to impact sleep onset, definitely fragment sleep when you're taking it within a couple hours of bed. So yeah, being really smart about the timing of your caffeine is critical. And obviously there's a circadian component to that. If I were to say, of the 4 circadian behaviors that we kind of outlined, I would kind of put caffeine in that as well, just because that can impact our, when we release melatonin, via adenosine.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
So we talked about exercise. Now the question that everyone else wants to know is sex.
Yeah.
Asking for a friend.
Yeah. I mean, sex. So generally speaking, sex with a partner close to bed seems to have a positive effect on sleep and a positive effect on mental health, which is not surprising. Yeah. So we've seen this in the data, which has been really fun to examine.
Sex closer to bedtime, not in the middle of the day.
Yep.
Got it.
This episode is brought to you by Inside Tracker. That's inside, like inside your body, insidetracker.com. Why do I love Inside Tracker? Well, because everybody complains about getting blood work done. I don't care who you are. You typically don't like to do it, and you don't like to go to the doctor's office. I've heard it a million times, but you do need to get blood work done, especially if you care about yourself and you care about your health and well-being, which is why I love Inside Tracker. In fact, I am getting a mobile blood draw on Tuesday to see what's going on with me, not because something's wrong, but because I should do it. And if I'm going to talk to you about it, then I'm going to do it myself. So I'm going to be utilizing their mobile blood draw service, which is amazing. You can head on over to Inside insidetracker.com/Dr. Lyon. You'll get 20% off all their store. So anything in their store for a limited time only, 20% off, which is a great deal. There are a handful of different packages that you can choose from, whether it's the ultimate or anything else, the Inner Age 2.0, you name it, but it really is important to understand what your hormones are doing, what your biomarkers are, what are the things that you can control, and what are the uncontrollables. Inside Tracker provides you with valuable information. It is vetted, it is evidence-based, which I love, and it's a great service. And I think that more and more people should be and will be using them. So head on over to insidetracker.com/Dr. Lyon for 20% off.
Oh, you can have it during the day too. I mean, I think sex at any time is probably a good thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it doesn't affect sex before bed, does not affect someone's circadian rhythm. In fact, maybe it has a positive impact.
Yep.
Let's talk about, do you have something?
Well, I would just say that for men, it probably will help them fall asleep faster. For women, not as much. Like we want to cuddle after sex. We want to kind of talk and stay awake a little bit, which is so interesting. Why were we made like
yourself.
that?
I'm like, good night.
I know.
I'm just kidding.
I'm
just kidding.
Saying this is what the science says about oxytocin, like what we release versus what men release after sex is a little bit different. So our needs after sex are a little bit different generally. So not that sleep onset for women would be, egregiously impacted, but maybe delayed slightly relative to a guy.
Now, that's a good question. And what was the next question I was going to? Oh, yeah. Heat, cold, other activities that I think are critical.
Yes.
Which, by the way, you jump in this freezing cold lake.
I know. I'm very, very passionate about colds. I love talking about it and practice this myself. So there's actually some new research that came out that from a protocol standpoint. So what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So this is kind of this concept of hormesis, and exposing yourself to extreme temperatures, both heat and cold, can have a massively beneficial impact on recovery. All right. So we certainly see this in the data, but as it relates to cold specifically, from a protocol standpoint, you want to try to once per week submerge yourself neck down in like 37-degree temperatures, which is very cold. And for like 2 minutes. And then 4 other days of the week, do a 30-second cold shower.
How cold?
So just, I know some pipes in Boston are very different than the pipes in Texas, even a little bit different than the pipes in New York, which my shower today was disappointingly a little warm. Yeah. No.
These people are so soft here in New York.
But you have, so you basically, the brown fat is kind of in your back and kind of your neck and your head. So you basically want to shower where it's kind of hitting your head into your back. And and we activate the brown tissue. But it was really cool. The study showed that with that protocol, the subjects reduced body fat and improved body composition and mentally felt better, more alert. So it was a really nice study, and
with just 30 seconds,
4 times a week, and then 1 time a week submerging for 2 minutes in this really cold water. But that and it sounds like I think the effects are pretty significant on just our mental health resilience, and that's been shown. There's a really good study in Amsterdam that looked at the experimental group did cold showers 5 days a week. The control group did not, and they looked at sick days, and they looked at and they had a bunch of mental health surveys, and the group who took part in these cold showers had many fewer sick days and had much better and showed a lot of increase in mental health resilience.
Do you think that the cold shower or the cold plunge and the cold shower is because they're proving to themselves that they can do something and withstand difficulty?
I think there's definitely a mindset component for sure. I'm from New England, so I've been swimming in cold oceans for my whole life. So
get in there. You're 3.
It's
Go
like
on.
a little bit less of a mindset thing for me. It's more of just like I want to have the benefit from this brown fat activation and everything that cascades metabolically from that is what's really interesting to me. But yeah, I think there's absolutely a mindset component. I mean, it is uncomfortable. I mean, as adapted as I am, like it still is like, when you're getting into 37, 38, 39 degree water, I mean, it feels very, very cold.
Do you have to build up to that?
I think so. Yeah. Some folks maybe not, but I think you just have to really, go with a buddy and, just be like, all right, we are going to do this, and maybe it's just 15 seconds and then it's 30 seconds. And then, 2 minutes can feel like an eternity, when you're in 37 degree water. So, and there is definitely, you're not going to, increase your benefits the more time you spend in the cold water. I mean,
that's important to know.
It's really important. Like you don't, and same with sauna, which we can talk about in a second. Like, there is a point of diminishing return. And not to mention, like you could die in 7 minutes being in those kind of temperatures of cold water.
That's not advisable.
That's not what we're trying to do here. So I definitely advise going with a friend. Don't engage in, sumo breathing in the water, clearly.
Yeah.
So there's certain recovery behaviors that you want to stack. That is not one of them. But yeah, I mean, definitely that cold shock is incredibly powerful for hormesis and can really amplify recovery.
Does it matter the time of day and when you do it regarding workouts?
Yes. So I think, so I would say because, you release dopamine and, it's like you feel really alert after the cold water. I would say you probably want to do it earlier in the day. Also, if you're doing a cold shower, for example, before bed, that actually is going to make your body warmer. And we know that in order to kind of fall asleep, your body actually your core body temperature needs to drop by 2 degrees. So we actually want to take a hot shower before or do a sauna before bed. So I would say heat in the back half of the day, cold in the front half of the day would be my kind of recommendation.
That is
because of its influence on sleep.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
In terms of
exercise. Yeah. So this has actually been so fun experimenting. So my son plays ice hockey so I work with, I'm in contact with a lot of ice hockey players in particular. And we've been, and I've been experimenting with this personally where I do just like a 30-second like quick dip and then I get dressed and then I do a workout and I just feel so good. And it sounds so counterintuitive in that, you're cold, you're getting your body cold before a workout. Like, don't you warm up? And it doesn't mean you don't do your warm up necessarily, but I think it's just all these, adrenaline, epinephrine and dopamine, like all these things that are released from the cold just gets you primed to work out. So all the ice hockey guys have been doing like 30-second showers before the game. And, again, it might just be a mental thing. It's like a bonding thing, but I think they get this surge. And and my son's ice hockey team has now been doing it, which is so cool.
That is cool.
Yeah.
They have a lot of assets, right? So they know exactly what they need to do.
Yeah.
You're in there looking at their work.
I'm not shy about kind of helping with the load management with those guys. Yeah.
And then what about sauna?
Yeah. So in this area, I suppose I know maybe a little less about, but I'll say just from the folks who know a lot about it, I will just regurgitate what they've said. And basically, I think it's 174 is the kind of the temperature. And you can certainly go more than that. And again, the more adapted you are to the heat, kind of, I think the higher temperature you can go. There might be a temperature where it becomes unsafe. I'm not exactly sure what that would be, maybe around kind of 220
and it's different
or something.
Yeah,
it's going to be different for everyone. So you have to experiment. And I know red light versus kind of dry heat are different, but both seem to have positive effects. And it sounds like from the research that, you want to spend about an hour over the course of a week exposing yourself to heat. 20-minute sessions is ideal. So 3 or 4 20-minute sessions per week seems to be ideal.
And does it matter? So you said that probably closer to bed or later on in the day.
I think so.
Helps
because it just makes you feel it makes you feel relaxed. And I mean, I think you've probably done a sauna before, of course, and you probably have them. Yeah. So yeah, I mean, I think for me, it always just makes me feel relaxed. I just want to stretch and, just like kind of hang out.
Me, I just want to hide in there.
Yeah.
Nope, not home.
Yeah.
Not home.
Not available.
Not available. Is there anything else that you see that really sets people apart in terms of either good or bad? I mean, we really highlighted the sleep wake time is critical.
Yeah.
Food timing is critical. Don't use alcohol. Train if you can earlier on in the day. Prioritize sleep.
Yep. Stop caffeine by 1 p.m.
By noon. These are all really great takeaway tips. Is there anything else that you see consistently, either good or bad, that maybe we haven't touched on?
Yeah. I mean, training is really important. I would say that people probably don't do enough sprinting.
I was going to ask you about that. I actually was going to ask you about that. And I was curious as to how that really impacts in terms of being able to relax and recover, because when you're done sprinting, you're exhausted.
Yeah, I think there is something different about sprinting. And I think there's a mindset component to that too. But I think when you consider just markers for age, like for aging, like I feel like if you can stay fast, like you're on a good path in terms of like longevity. And so I guess I see it, and there's actually a really interesting study with master sprinters looking at telomere length, and master sprinters had more telomere length than individuals who don't sprint. So I do think there's this kind of aging component with sprinting that is really compelling. But yeah, I mean, I would say that people don't probably do enough in zone 5, and that max
totally agree with
effort.
you.
I think people spend a lot of time in these submaximal efforts. And I think particularly for women, we know Dr. Stacey Sims, and she was I just spoke to her the other day on this topic specifically. And, I think for women who are in menopause, resistance training and, these maximal efforts are actually really, really important. So I think that I would say that probably spending time in those maximal efforts needs to happen more. Yeah.
And that could start 1 day a week, twice a week.
Yeah. I mean, really, I think the kind of prescription is, get out of breath twice a week for a couple minutes. Like that's it, and if you do that, then you're on your way.
Yeah, you're on your way.
It's just, go in your driveway and sprint, find 100 meters somewhere and, a field and just go.
Or they could do airdyne, rowers,
skier. Yeah. I think, if people aren't
anything.
into running, there's other ways to kind of definitely to reach those maximal efforts. But I do think if you're capable and able, I do think there's something about having your feet on the ground and kind of moving fast.
I love that. You do talk a lot about data. I also know that you have another side to you, which is really that psychological side. And again, you've worked with athletes, you've been an athlete. Do you see one thing or perhaps one character trait, and maybe there isn't one, that really allows people to be resilient and adaptable that you've seen over not just, working with the athletes that are utilizing Whoop, but just over your career? Because you've had quite a long career, and you didn't mention how well Princeton did.
Yeah, we had
under
a lot
your
of success.
Yeah. Pretty humble. I mean, I think that what was the record? I think.
Yeah, I mean, we won 12 Ivy League championships, so 12 conference championships in 13 years, and a national championship.
And when you left, there were tears of sadness everywhere.
No, I mean,
pretty incredible.
The current coach is really phenomenal. She's a dear friend of mine, and it was kind of funny because when I knew I was leaving, I was like, Carla, you need to come take over here, and she has, and she's done phenomenally. So, so they're in good hands, but yeah, it was an awesome time. And, I would say, I mean, I've worked with Olympians and I've worked with professional athletes, and, I would say there's a couple things that I think separate them. And this is going to sound so counterintuitive, but they don't compete. They, in the sense that they're not competing with the people around them. They're competing with themselves 100% of the time. Like, and they don't have this like self-consciousness that I think is what holds a lot of us back. It's just, they're so focused on the work and the quality of their work. And they just are absorbed in that. And everything else just falls away, And I think that's what I've always admired in the athletes. And I think, one of the principles that I live my life by is that, I'm not gonna compete. no one is going to be better at being me than me. So I'm just going to be me. And I'm going to, I'm going to absorb myself in the things that I really care about. And I'm going to live my values. And that's all I'm going to focus on. And I think if we can do that, the outcomes kind of take care of themselves, and we get pushed toward, we almost don't even need goals at that point, because we get pushed toward the things that we're really excited about, and that, and we're willing to kind of grind through the less glamorous points to kind of just pursue that work. So definitely, I think, not competing is definitely an attribute that I see, in a lot of the really successful athletes that I've worked with. And I think number 2 is self-awareness. So, and I would say, I've had just some exceptional leaders that I have come across, and they always carve out time to think. Like, they spend time alone. They don't seem distracted by things. They're just really clear about their life. But they're all those things because they create space for themselves daily to really think. And I would say that is the superpower of the 21st century, is being control of your attention and control of your thoughts. But if you don't make space to actually understand the contents of your mind, you're fucked.
Totally.
And sorry, you're screwed. You can edit that out. Whatever.
No, you can say, say whatever you want here.
But I think that, to me, like, when I think about, all the academic work I've done in the field of psychology, and, for me, you start with self-awareness, and you start to build a framework for yourself that helps you understand that internal dialogue. Like, if you are not able to understand the conversation that's happening internally, it's very, very hard to make clear decisions about your life. Because a lot of what goes on in our mind, that wheel that turns, is generally nonsense. So we need to be able to discern, okay, what is nonsense and what is worth keeping. The stuff that's worth keeping is who you want to be. The nonsense is who you don't want to be. But if you allow that to dominate, or, God, at worst, you're not aware of it, you end up flinging yourself in all sorts of directions.
I think that is some of the most valuable information that any of the listeners have heard in all the podcasts.
Well,
and here's why. What you just shared is taken from personal experience, and also taken from some of the best in the world. And you're showing us one of the defining attributes of these individuals that, you're right, completely counterintuitive.
Yeah.
And they're undistracted.
Yeah.
And they're not competing.
Yeah.
And they are fully invested in being the best version of themselves.
Yeah.
And that's powerful.
Yeah. And defining that for themselves,
Kristen Holmes, you are...
Love you.
I love you too. You are an amazing, amazing human. Everyone should know who you are. And in due time, they will.
Appreciate
and
that.
We're going to include all your links, and your link to your Instagram and your Whoop and all your amazing things that you're doing. Thank you so much for spending time with me.
Thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.